Please talk about your professional journey. Where did you start and where are you now? And how were your mentors? Please.
Okay, good. It's
Mm.
good to be with you today. Thanks for inviting me to this. So after I graduated with my master's degree, I was hired at Western Psychiatric Institute and Clinic in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and was delighted to work at that institute. It was a cutting edge research center. And so I learned so much during my time there. And then my husband and I moved to the eastern part of Pennsylvania to a very rural community. And I was joining another therapist in practice and asked him what model he uses for his therapy. And he said contextual therapy. And I thought, I've never heard of that. And I'm working at this cutting edge research institute. It must not be a very important model. But the more he talked about this approach and what it meant to his life and how it was changing his relationships with members of his family, I was deeply intrigued and really drawn to it. So I kept pursuing and engaged a contextual supervisor so I could learn more about the approach in my work. And I think that one reason it called me so deeply was because I grew up in a family that was embedded in a religious community that really focused on fairness and justice and care for the other. And those deeper life ethics and values weren't necessarily spoken about in many other theories. And so I was really finding something that deepened my work in ways that I had been searching for. Then I had the great privilege of being supervised by Dr. Barbara Krasner. And later, when I went for my doctoral work, Dr. Doug Schoeniger, who's a speaker at the conference, was on my doctoral committee, as was Dr. Maurice Friedman, who was a close friend of Martin Buber's and translated much of his work. So there were other wonderful mentors as well, but those are three that impacted me very deeply in very gifted ways. I'm just so privileged to be able to have worked with them. So I practiced as a therapist for a number of years and then really sensed that something else was stirring inside of me. So I went back for my PhD and really wanted to teach, and a door opened to be able to do that in a master's program of marriage and family therapy. And so now I've been teaching, supervising students, and have a small private practice as well.
When were you introduced to the contextual approach of Ivan, and how did it affect you? But actually, you already answered.
I can
or
add
if you want to add more, of course, I'm very happy to hear it.
I'll add one more piece, because in my doctoral work, I focused in on contextual as well. And for my dissertation, I had the privilege of interviewing families. I brought together 3 generations. And so I had parents who were in the 70s or 80s, and then the middle generation in the 50s or 60s, and the youngest generation in the 30s or 40s. And having 3 generations together in one room and talking about their life together across the years and what kind of loyalty expectations they bumped into between the generations and how they navigated that and whether they brought dialogue to it or whether they cut off was just a profound research experience for me, and really meant something very deep for me as a clinician as well. And one of the men in the eldest generation, who was in his 80s, said to me at the last meeting, "I wish every family could have an opportunity to do this because it's been so powerful." And I think that those kinds of delightful engagements, seeing family members across the generations, meeting one another in new ways and enjoying that and letting that be a resource and enliven their relationships in the therapy room, but then even in the research process, which wasn't the goal, but it was an outcome. So all those good gifts have brought back wonderful things for me.
Thank you very much. It was really nice that you shared this.
You bring a very interesting topic to the conference. Please explain it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm going to be looking at the process of dialogue in the educational setting. So whether that's teaching in a classroom or whether that's supervising students or clinicians working toward licensure. Naj, one of the challenges of contextual work is that we can't just do it as a function. We can't just apply techniques. We have to bring our person, right? And who I am in the context of my own relationships and my own life matters in how I relate to my student or my supervisee. So often traditionally education has been seen as, as Buber says, let's put knowledge into the head of students, but that's not education really. Education is drawing out something from the student. And that's such a resource-based approach, and contextual is a wonderful fit with that. So I've worked at what does it mean for me as an educator to live with my students and supervisees in dialogical ways, in ways that I bring myself as a person to them and invite their person to come forward as well. So I'm going to be talking about that. I'll share a pilot study that I did with students who went through a class on dialogical engagement that was very much formed out of sitting in that space and figuring out how do I show up? How do I meet the other? What's that like for me? And just some of the profound things that happened for the students. I'll be sharing some of that, and then also sharing some touch points that guide me in this process. Because it's not always easy to bring my own life. Some days I'm at a spot where I don't feel like showing up with courage, and yet it's so rewarding. So I think of a time I was sitting with a supervisee who was pretty new as an intern. And in listening to how was I bringing myself, I realized I am profoundly bored at this moment. There's no passion here. And what do I do with this? And so I decided to risk the courage to just bring this to the supervisee. And so I said, Tony, something's coming up for me. And in this moment, I realize I'm very bored and I just can't find any passion or any connection between you and the client here. And Tony suddenly came alive and he said, I am so glad you said that because I am very bored too. And it just opened up a lively conversation between us. Neither of us were bored the whole rest of the session because then he could talk about how he was holding back with the client and not wanting to risk asking the question that he sensed the client was holding, but he wanted to wait for the client to bring it up. They were both waiting on one another and nothing was happening. And I stepped outside of the waiting and took the risk to say, here's where I am, where are you? And all of a sudden it shifted between us and then shifted between him and the client as well. So that's a little example of some of the kind of vitality of supervising or educating in this kind of the gift of contextual as we live it out in the educational setting.
as far as I know, that you made a video, a movie in 2018 about Ivan.
Mhm.
And I'm just asking that, what was your motivation to do this movie? Please tell me more about.
I will. That I was initially inspired by Dr. Monica McGoldrick, and who's a friend of yours, Mike.
Yeah.
And she was developing some videos on some of the early theorists in family therapy. She didn't want their stories and their legacies to be lost, and she was hoping someone would do it on Ivan Bosameni-Nagy. And I decided to try that and see what could come of that. And I thought this shouldn't be too hard to put some things together. Little did I know the journey it was going to take me on. And I began to dive more deeply into what has been written about him and his own writings, and looked again at the videos that some of the videos that he had done. And then it also led me to the point where I met Dr. Catherine Bosameni-Nagy, who I had not known before. And she invited me to her home, and she very graciously shared some photos from Nagy's early life and some more stories, collaborated some things that I was working with. She was a tremendous resource on this journey. And it just kept evolving. And I decided that what I wanted to do was both tell something of his life journey and how contextual evolved for him, but I also wanted to do it in a way that shared the tenets of contextual, that someone could learn more about the theory and how to work with it in beginning kinds of ways. And that evolved into the video, The Bridge Between, and it can be found, it's free on my website, www.thebridgebetween.org. And I had the honor of being able to present it at the Second International Contextual Therapy Conference in the Netherlands a couple years ago. And I hope it's a resource to people. It was really fascinating for me to be able to do an in-depth look at how does someone of this brilliance bring up and grow this kind of a theory. And just to look at more of the pieces of how that emerged was just a fascinating experience. And I hope that comes through in the video.
The other question is, why is it important for you to attend the conference?
Mm-hmm.
And the other question is, how would you motivate people to come to the conference?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, it's a great place to connect with other contextual therapists and to get outside of my own frame and understand how other people are applying it and living it and enlarging it. And it's just so much fun to get to know people that I've read in the literature or I've seen on Zoom or on tape, and just to meet face to face and sit around and chat about what we love and kind of grow one another together. And I think it's just a great space to share ideas and see what's percolating. The other piece is, I think it's the way we pass the legacy on to other generations. I have a supervisee, someone who came through our program as a student and now is being supervised by me to licensure. And she has just grown so deeply in this work and does it beautifully with clients. And I invited her to consider coming and presenting, and she's coming along. So there's a lot of joy in being able to inspire and lead others into their work and share it as a resource for other people as well. So I hope many people will come and we'll have a wonderful time together. I'm very excited.
Thank you.
We do hope so
Yeah.
Have you been to Budapest or in Hungary?
I have not. The closest I've been was in Vienna, Austria, a few years ago.
Mhm.
And I was longing to get to Budapest, but our time for our trip just didn't quite allow for that. So I'm delighted to be coming. All of my friends who hear that I'm going are saying it is such a beautiful and wonderful city. And I just heard so many fun things about it. So I'm delighted that I get the chance to do this.
We really hope so that you can come and we can meet personally.
Yes, indeed. It will be lovely.